Well, the White House says President Trump has tested negative for the coronavirus, and it comes after he said he was tested Friday. He recently came into contact with two people who tested positive to the virus and faced mounting pressure to be checked for it himself. And we've just learned that Vice President Mike Pence has not been tested. The White House says he didn't need the test based on CDC guidelines. Well, President Trump's administration has been under fire for how it's handled testing for both the president himself and, frankly, for all Americans, everyone living in this country. And when asked about it on Friday, he deflected the blame without offering evidence. He said the fault lies with his predecessor, former President Barack Obama.
Dr. Fauci said earlier this week that the lag in testing was, in fact, a failing. Do you take responsibility for that? And when can you guarantee that every single American who needs a test will be able to have a test? What's the date of that?
Yeah, no, I don't take responsibility at all because we were given a set of circumstances and we were given rules, regulations, and specifications from a different time. Wasn't meant for this kind of an event with the kind of numbers that we're talking about.
To help explain what strategies might help the U.S. get through the pandemic, I'm joined now by Michael Bociurkiw from New York via Skype. He's a global affairs analyst and former spokesman for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Good to have you with us, Michael.
Good to be with you, Linda.
So I want to start first on the U.S. response to this pandemic, because we have been reporting extensively on this virus now for months. And even now, we're in the middle of March, we're still hearing that there aren't enough tests available. Hospitals, doctors are saying people are coming to them from level 3 countries with symptoms and they still can't get enough tests. What do you make of the response here in the United States?
Well, amateur hour at the White House. I mean, we've been seeing for weeks now this drip, drip, knee-jerk type of approach. You know, Linda, I've worked for UNICEF and a little bit for WHO on disease outbreaks around the world, measles and polio, and I've seen better preparation, better pre-positioning in developing countries than here, where in those countries you have from the very start all hands on deck, all of society, all of government approach. But I think what was missing here is very, very early aggressive interventions like we've seen in Hong Kong and especially Singapore. In Singapore, for example, they had widespread testing. They had very strict quarantine. Very, very early on, they stopped traffic from China. And then also very, very important, which I'm not really seeing here, is intensive tracing. Where did the virus come from and from where to where did it move? And then finally, surge capacity. WHO said recently that the problem in a lot of wealthier countries is hospitals here are operating on a very lean and mean type of protocol. So with that, coupled with cuts in funding for a pandemic outbreak, leaves the United States in a very vulnerable place.
Yeah, it certainly does. We heard earlier from the governor of Illinois, who has some pretty harsh words for the Trump administration, and he tweeted that he needs to know what it's like to get together. This is what he said: the federal government needs to get its act together, basically, now. He's talking about the crazy lines we're seeing at the airport. More travel restrictions are again on the way. What do you make of the way this has played out, given that it seems like the Trump team didn't even talk to their representatives that they're in Europe, in the UK, about rolling out this travel ban? It all happened quite quickly, and it seemed to catch even the airports off guard.
Yeah, well, Linda, nothing short of disastrous. I mean, I flew in a few days ago from Europe and there was zero screening, and now we've gone to this intensive screening and long lineups, lack of preparation. I think what is happening here in the United States is the local governments, the state governments are fed up and they're acting unilaterally. I mean, just a few hours ago, the mayor of Hoboken nearby me has declared a curfew. And that is happening globally. There's very, very little lack of coordination. I think one of your colleagues called it a America First policy is happening in the Trump White House. So that means that we're not coordinating with the EU. In fact, the United States, I think, has really upset them by acting unilaterally. The other thing, just quickly, Linda, is WHO would normally be the global authority on these types of outbreaks. But I think what we've been seeing happening is a lot of countries actually ignoring their device and acting unilaterally, and that hasn't helped us in any way whatsoever either. So their moral authority, I think, has really declined, and that could be very harmful in future, God forbid, outbreaks.
Yeah. And Michael, a new national poll on the virus here in the US has been released. It's the results from NBC News and Wall Street, which obviously show a lot of concern. It found that most people interviewed, more than 60%, believe the worst is yet to come. What do you make of that? Because we are certainly hearing from places like the CDC that say that even though schools might be closed for the next 2 to 4 weeks, it could be at least 8 weeks, maybe the end of the year, which means you're going to have people that are looking after kids trying to work from home. This is going to have global ramifications.
Absolutely. I fall into that category of the more pessimistic approach because of the time that was lost by particularly the Trump administration. This will go on for a long time. We're going to see a huge upswing in cases. We're going to see, sadly, a lot of deaths. And Lynda, my heart goes out to especially to healthcare workers, but I hope we don't get to that point where we are in some parts of Italy where health workers, doctors are having to make life and death decisions on what type of equipment is deployed to certain patients. But it really is sad to see. You know, America is respected worldwide for its ingenuity, for its wealth, and usually when these types of things happen, it's a leader. But I think we're seeing the Trump playbook here at work, where blame others, don't take responsibility, and again, previous cuts that have happened have really put the country in a bad position. So everyone needs to work together, look after each other, strong prayers. It's going to be a very tough ride. We're all hoping for the best.
Yeah, we often do hear about that in times of global crisis, in the past, the world turns to the United States to lead the world out of a problem. It certainly doesn't seem to be happening in this case. And we did hear from the top infectious disease expert, Anthony Fauci, who spoke to my colleague Brandon Killer just a short time ago. And he didn't rule out putting the entire country on a temporary national lockdown. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say.
Would you like to see a national lockdown? Basically, people, you can't go out to restaurants, bars. You need to stay home?
Well, I would like to see a dramatic diminution of the personal interaction that we see in restaurants and in bars. Whatever it takes to do that, that's what I'd like to see.
That's certainly pretty scary to hear, given how quickly this travel ban rolled out and how quickly we saw that scramble for people to fly home from Europe, to fly home from the UK, to get back into the United States. Certainly that is going to create some fear, I think, amongst people once they hear that there could be this mandatory lockdown.
Yeah, well, Lynda, that significant behavioral change that needed to happen earlier, not going out to restaurants, that sort of thing, isn't happening. And here, of course, in New York City, a lot of people cannot afford the luxury to have that spacing, especially in the subways. If you're an hourly wage earner, you're not going to be taking an Uber. So that's a big problem here. And we're, you know, we live in a different atmosphere here where people love and fight for these liberties. So it's going to take a government order. It needs to happen now. Stay at home, minimum 2 weeks, nothing moves. Sharp and short interventions. And quickly, Lynda, I mean, I'm often asked, well, why did it work in Singapore? Well, you know, there they have this kind of optimal balance between cutting edge capitalism and managed paternalism, or 90s statism, if I can put it that way. So people are used to listening to the government, whereas here I think we've had a real drop in trust in government, and that's playing itself out hourly, daily, weekly here with this pandemic.